through numbers 3 and 4, but also want to just have y'all come back to this space really quickly to see if there are any questions or any thoughts, ideas. Sounds like some folks are creating their own style of interruption, which is great. I'll add that to the list.
I was going to call out, and maybe this is on the list in a form, but I just want to call out a couple people in our group who brought the conversation back to the company's DEI goals. And so it wasn't, I think it's a very good way to address the issue without being sort of accusatory in any way, and trying to reframe, hey, we should be thinking about these, these issues as part of our company goals or programs or whatever.
Yeah, I like that sort of just a reframing of it. It's like bringing them back out of whatever space they're in. It's like, well, this is what we decided as a group a long time ago, so we got to make sure we're staying true to that. I like that. Anyone else want to share a little bit before you head back in?
I wanted to say that depending on the relationship between you and the employer or the supervisor who you are dealing with, it might be intimidating to even react in the first place, depending on who the boss is, what his personality is. If my intervention can cost me my job, I might be intimidated to speak in the first place. I mean, I can lose my job by saying anything, but the supervisor might make it look different. He might try to find for a different reason to fire for my intervention or be upset. And then it might go unnoticed. So retaliation can stop many people for even reacting in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Go ahead, Annabelle, you were going to add something.
I was going to add, that was a little bit of what one of my, for example, I stated I was going to avoid the look, because by the sound of it, I was assuming there probably is no other minorities in this planning committee. So that was already something that was kind of being crossed off. And then also just even thinking about what other partners or colleagues I have that I can rely on that, which brings a big different scenario for the company culture altogether.
Yeah, the sort of the dynamics and demographics of the group sometimes change what you can do. I'm always really mindful of body language, having had white folks in many spaces misread what that is and then sort of place stereotypical judgments on it, whether it's like sitting with my arms crossed or maybe even sometimes it's just about speaking in a louder voice than I normally do and having that interpreted as being angry or as yelling. So very good point from you both in terms of back to positionality for folks of color. This whole calculation is very different. Thank you both for that. Yeah,
that's interesting, Rakeem, because I would love to have your demeanor, and I'm,
Yeah, well, Cassie has seen moments when that demeanor does not exist in the same way. So it's easier here in this space. We're having purposeful conversations about it. In other spaces where folks sort of resist that conversation, much more challenging. But thanks for that. Joan, you were going to add something.
Well, I had a question. This goes back to something we talked about, I think, the first session. So as I understand the scenario, there's one person of color on the committee, and that's the person who has raised this question. And the easy thing for everyone else sitting around the table to say is, oh, well, why don't we just add you to the panel? And I didn't. So I recognize, based on our prior conversation, that that's probably not a good thing to do, but I don't know. Maybe the answer is you just don't do it, but whether you say, do we take time to find someone who might be appropriate, or how would you deal with that?
Yeah, Cassie, do you want to take that? You want me to go first? Okay. Well, I think one of the things that's really important to understand is one of the ways in which so whiteness shows up for folks is this sort of false sense of urgency, right? There never seems to be time to have these purposeful, deliberate conversations about race. So in this scenario, as the person saying, hey, it's kind of a problem that all of the panelists are white, isn't it? White supremacy will say, hey, we've gone too far in this process. We don't have time to turn around and restart it. And so part of that interruption is an understanding that, yeah, sometimes we do have to slow things down. Maybe it means that we need to change the date of the event. Maybe it means we need to reprioritize what we had on our calendars and spend more focus trying to figure out how to fix this here. Maybe even in some cases, it might mean we need to cancel the whole thing. And so it really depends on sort of the individual circumstances in it. But part of what this person is objecting to is not only that the panelists are all white, but that the process to get to that panel must be flawed, right? If we went through this whole decision-making process and no one else saw this as an issue, it probably means we have a flaw in the planning of it to begin with. And to go forward with that flaw in place means that we're likely to introduce some harm to the folks that are going to experience that panel. And when you start to weigh it out that way, you might come to the conclusion that I don't think we're ready to put this on yet. And it might mean a hard, uncomfortable conversation with folks that you've already talked to and have agreed to sort of block out their calendar and show up and speak. Maybe even you've paid for a flight and hotel room and you have to rethink about what that cost is going to look like. But if the intention is to create more equitable spaces, is to create room to talk about and dismantle white supremacy, sometimes it means that we're in really uncomfortable conversations about decisions that we've already made. That's a great question, though. Yeah. Cassie, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add two brief things. One being a lot of times folks of color in particular don't raise concerns because then they are going to be made to be responsible for also fixing them or resolving them. And so asking the person, well, why don't you just be on the panel then as well, then puts the person in both responsible for raising the concern and also now somehow fixing it. And it's likely in this hypo that this person isn't an HR professional or isn't somebody who would be good on the panel. They're just a employee who's already donated their time. Sorry, I've got a creature invading my personal space. It could be that they're just somebody who cares about the issues, and so that's why they volunteered their time for the panel, but would not actually be good as a panelist. Another thing that we oftentimes do is assuming that folks of color are always experts and or want to be experts or talk about racism issues just because they are Black or brown or Indigenous.
Yeah.
So shall we just put you back into rooms? I'm going to put you in the same rooms.
Sounds
right,
good.
Raheem?
Sure. And then we've got scenarios 3 and 4 to look over, and then we'll try and bring you back for a little more conversation if we can squeeze it in towards the end.